Hello and welcome to WWF-India's podcast series. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome Mr. Arjun Nohwar, who is the country GM India South Asia Warner Brothers Discovery, and Dr. Dipankar, who is the Senior Director, Biodiversity Conservation, WWF-India. Arjun is an avid golfer. He's played internationally. He is passionate about many other sports as well. He loves to travel, especially with his family, and he has been passionate about conservation for a long time, which is why the partnership with WWF India came very naturally to him. Dr. Dipankar Ghose he started his career as an artist actually, painted birds and trees for the books at Tollygunge Club, am I right?
Yeah.
And in the early 90s, and after studying zoology, he did his PhD on birds. He's an avid bird watcher, he's also a nature photographer, and he's a self-proclaimed chef. Who am I? I am the WWF India Marketing Director, and today I'm mostly the timekeeper and the moderator for this very, very exciting conversation. So when a seasoned conservationist and the head of one of India's largest media and entertainment companies talk conservation, it's very hard to tell where the conversation is actually going to head. So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to let the conversation flow. Arjun, I'm going to dive right in with you.
Sure.
So, when was your first tiger sighting in the wild, and what was your first wildlife experience as such? And many people say that their life is altered after they see a tiger for the first time, or they have some sort of an incredible experience in the wild.
Right.
So do share your first time.
Yeah, well, I guess, thanks Kaveri, and lovely to be here, Dr. Ghosh. I guess I'm still waiting for the life-altering experience where I actually look a tiger in the eye from a safe distance. I've only, unfortunately, heard a tiger roar. I've not seen one yet. We tried extensively when we went to Sundarbans. They're very elusive, and they camouflage themselves really well, and that's why they're so successful and they thrive over there. And we could hear them from a distance after 2 days of searching from them in the boats, but we never got a glimpse of it. The second time, I guess, was in Uti. So in the hills in Kannur, you also have tiger spottings occasionally. And we over there, once we were playing around with golf and the locals made a little bit of hue and cry that there was a tiger nearby. Luckily, it never came. We routinely see the big gores on the course, but and that's what the tiger hunts. I didn't get to spot one though. I wasn't that fortunate. So I'm looking forward to it, and perhaps go with your team to Sundarbans, to the campsites where you can perhaps encounter one.
Yeah, Sundarbans is perhaps not the area to see a tiger. Chances are very, very low because there are other open forests in central India, in Rajasthan, where sighting is possibly little more. I would say chances are much more. But then there are people from Delhi who have been to Sundarbans first trip, first morning boat ride, and lo and behold, the tiger was like swimming in front of them.
Wow.
So it's just the luck, I guess.
So where do you recommend? Is Kana? Or
I would say Kandha, Tadoba, Bandhavgarh, Ranthambore. These are the 4 areas where people generally get to see tigers little better, little more because of the open forest, open habitats.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Arjun, tell me, there's a lot of conversation at the moment. Of course, tiger numbers have been discussed, and there's a lot of focus on tigers. But one of the hot topics, is the whole human-wildlife conflict and the fact that how is their coexistence to be now perceived and managed, right? From a media and entertainment content, one of the largest content creators perspective, how do you think the narrative around this is changing in terms of the way stories are being told and conversations are being sort of propelled by your content?
Yeah, look, I think we've all grown up watching, Jungle Book and Sher Khan, and we all kind of had this stereotypical idea about the tiger being the big alpha apex predator, which it is, but also it gave it a little bit of a bad rap, right? I think the discourse needs to shift to understand, and what you read in the papers also usually is if there is a human tiger conflict, and if somebody is it's been an adverse conflict, then suddenly it splashes in the papers. And therefore people try to they inadvertently create these perceptions about what are probably the most magnificent and majestic, big cats or animals out there. The role of the media is to portray in the right light the nature and the nature of the beast, so to speak, and how they essentially, they're not communal animals like lions, right? They're solitary animals, but what is their life truly like? Right from when they're born, when they are when they learn to hunt, when they go away from the safety net of the mother, and then when they mate, when they then again the male goes away, the mother raises the cubs. And I think if we have documentaries and documentation of that, which platforms like Discovery along with WWF and some of our other peer networks as well, we will. The more we do put this out there, the more people will realize this is a species to be treasured. And then it starts having externalities in terms of general policies and perception of the public when it comes to how to avoid and reduce human-tiger conflict, whether it is making sure that there is reduction of the illicit trade that's leading to tiger hunting and poaching, and in general just having us celebrate the tiger, which is our national animal as well, right?
Beautifully said. Dr. Ghosh, so I'll bring in your expert opinion here, since you have sort of been in the field and you've seen it firsthand. This whole sort of situation of poaching, right? You mentioned a while back about the entire international demand defining the way poaching is happening at the moment and why the numbers have gone up, etc. What is your analysis and your recommendation or your suggestion in terms of how this should be managed?
That's a good question. I think two ways. One is what Arjun has been saying is to talk to people, to talk to viewers, to talk to the common people living in cities about why we need to treasure this animal. We need more support for the tigers and for tiger conservation. And this should come in terms of showing solidarity for people who are conserving. It's not just the job of those forest guards or the local communities who are bearing the brunt of tiger conservation. Sundarbans sees large number of people encountering tigers and they lose their lives. In the recent past, we have seen human-tiger encounters and resulting injuries to people and capture of tigers and death of people have taken place in central India near Chandrapur, Tadoba landscape, and also in Pilibhit in Uttar Pradesh. We need to stand by these people. We need to stand by the forest department, change the narrative from conflict to coexistence. That's something that you have been saying, that we need to find the narrative, and I think it's time the narrative has come, which is what even our Honorable Prime Minister was also saying, that we need to look at coexistence, how we can coexist. And India is the country which has now shown it can have so many tigers. Our latest estimate shows about approximately 3,700 tigers. That's a huge number. That's a huge I would say increase in terms of the estimation from the last time. So that's the first thing, is that we need to get this human connect. Like, we all need to value. There are less than 4,000 tigers, but we also have 1.4 billion people. How are we valuing our national animal, right? That's one. Second, I think India is also at a leadership position in the whole world to drive human behavior. Why are tigers being poached in India or in a couple of other neighboring countries? Is that the demand is not in India. The demand for tiger products is coming from across the borders and not in South Asia. Without getting into the details, if we can start working, government, NGOs, media, if these three entities work together, we can really shape and change people's behavior in terms of this consumption. Mm-hmm. Now, if tiger body parts are used in traditional Oriental medicine, that needs to stop. You cannot put an animal to extermination, put their survival at grave risk by saying that this will change. And there must be synthetic or
substitutes,
synthetic or chemical substitutes to that, right? Although it has not been proven that what tiger skin does or what tiger bone does, it has not been proven scientifically. And that's the only reason, is that it's not much cultural, it's more the belief in the traditional medicine, the oriental medicine, which has to reduce. The demand for tiger products has to reduce if we want our tigers to survive.
Right.
So Arjun, that's interesting. So I'll have a question based on that. So we often have a tendency to create content which is extremely optimistic, extremely positive. We want that emotional resonance, which is of course valid. But say situations the idea of how do you build awareness around why poaching is happening, for instance. It's a troubling concept, it's a troubling theme.
It is.
How does one approach a topic like that? And to create awareness, to let people know without necessarily entering the space of an incredibly disturbing or negative narrative?
We actually attempted to do that. So we launched on the 21st of August a 5-part series based on the tiger guards of Kana. So we took a very different lens when we wanted to talk about tigers and engage the public in a discourse that basically goes beyond just showing footage and filming tigers, right? Because I think there's a lot out there. People need to understand the benefits that a growing tiger, thriving tiger population has on the ecosystem itself, and then what are the good efforts that are already bearing fruit. A lot of times the discourse focuses on we only have so many tigers left, what's not working. We wanted to apply a different lens, which is what is working, and the 5-part series basically focuses on that. The absolutely honorable efforts that are being made by these tiger guards. What are the challenges that they face? Just placing camera traps and going and checking them out, refreshing them. They oftentimes get knocked down by nature, like by different animals. You have to go and continuously reorient them, and they're putting themselves at risk while doing a simple routine sortie, so to speak, right? And everything that, and then how even for their lives, how does their kind of interaction with their community? If there's something that goes wrong, they're the first port of call for the community as when there's a flashpoint that gets created. So how do they cater with that? So I think that's one way where we engage and enlarge the discourse beyond just showing the life of a tiger. And then we're also very happy. We've got another series called Mission Big Cat, which is coming out on Animal Planet in October. So that encompasses as well. Of course, you focus on the core, which is everything about the cat, about the tiger, as well as then what are the community engagement efforts that are happening at a policy level, at a community level, and then what is it that people are talking about, their opinion and their point of view, which often gets left out. So we're trying to apply that lens and giving a holistic 360-degree, so to speak, appreciation of what it means, to focus on tigers and the impact they have on the communities around them.
And how was the first one that you mentioned? I mean, how do you sort of measure impact and measure the sort of shift it's creating in perception or awareness building? Like, how was it received, for example?
So, our statistics would be numbers, right? So in terms of how slot averages have moved, how viewership has gone, what the TRP has moved, I think that will only give us that much. That does not translate to impact. That translates to awareness, which is not a bad thing. The response has been really good, and awareness always leads to people kind of developing a more educated point of view, not completely relying on hearsay or anything else that they hear. So we're glad about that. But it's through partnerships with WWF and other grassroots organizations, other NGOs that are working on this, that you can really translate this to impact, right? So that's what I believe. I mean, we're doing our bit, and we are happy to support organizations like yours and others to be able to execute on ground.
No, thank you. I think what you said about tiger guards of Kanha, I'll try and see if we get time. But I think that's so important, especially from the angle of how conservation is being done, because NGOs, we do have our outreach channels, but if it is coming not from the NGOs, but if it is coming from the big content media house like Discovery, Warner Brothers, then it changes. More and more people would love to listen to that. if WWF is talking, then people would expect us to talk something positive, something which is conservation, right? That's something which is related to tiger conservation. But if the moment people are watching something on television and this is not an NGO or a government specific, then I think it opens their mind also.
Correct. It's a little bit more neutral narration of how things are rather than what might be perceived as an agenda.
Right.
And I think we can't take away the fact that there is, at the end of the day, it is the entertainment aspect of it as well, right? There has to be emotional resonance. Something which is in a completely documentary format would be received with a very niche audience, limited impact. Whereas the moment you bring in, I mean, we've seen how the elephant documentary recently won so many awards, right? Because there was a whole emotional aspect. Which brings me to the next question to both of you, actually. Which is, how do we now start looking at content, given that most of the content is now being consumed online, OTT platforms have taken over, etc. How do we approach content from a slightly less academic and docudrama sort of format and bring it more mainstream, bring it more, make people want to actually consume that content regardless of their interest in conservation and tigers? Because I think there is one audience which will reach out for this sort of content, right? But then there is an audience we need to speak to who's not necessarily seeking this. So what should be our approach is my question to you, and what is your approach to make it more mainstream, reaching audiences who may not necessarily want to consume that content?
I think, look, it's at the end of the day, if people are devoting time to watch a piece of content over the myriad content that's available to them, the content needs to be entertaining, all right? Oftentimes what we're able to release is hybrid of entertainment and education, right? It's almost edutainment content, and I think that's where the story needs to go, because it can't. While movies and series definitely have their role to play, but they tend to be more on a plot where there's an encounter and there's a near life or death experience or a situation like that, and they want to dramatize it, and that's fantastic. We love watching all that stuff. It's fictional drama. But for people to actually consume this, you need to make it interesting, because somebody's volunteering and portioning their time to watch a piece of content A versus B, right? So they need to be entertained, they need to be educated. Second, we need to understand what is it that people want to learn more of. There's enough content out there which shows, less so for tigers because they're so elusive, but you have to look at the whole kind of life cycle of the species and then the interaction with the ecosystem. I think and therefore there have to be different vectors. So there's a series which basically documents the life cycle of the animal, all right, shows it in various different lights. It is a brutal apex predator, extremely ruthless and efficient. We have to show that, but it's also absolutely very strongly social when a mother is raising its cubs, very territorial, very protective of her brood. And a very gentle side as well. So that should come across. And so you should show everything. One vector is everything about the animal, right? The other is how, despite being an apex predator, it is so vulnerable, right? And how it's like the butterfly effect. Small decisions that we're taking is kind of creating disastrous impact on the tiger population. And how does that then create an aha moment in the eyes of the viewer? That we never realized these decisions of ours are translating into this. Now, whether that is taking a particular tiger balm or whichever, I'm not kind of naming brands, but something that could be in medicines, or bones are crushed and that's used for alleviating pain, and you kind of, whether you call it out, maybe there's science, maybe there's not science, but you explore those questions, talk about the alternatives so that there is consumption habits can change. And then you really talk about how we depend on tigers. So when we talk about us, we usually think of people living in metros and then people who are cultivating like agricultural lives. But there are people who are literally living lives in the forests. And there are millions of such Indians, and they encounter and they supply us a lot of what we consume, including whether it is honey or any other berries, or how much of forest agricultural produce that they extract from the forest. So what is their life like? So I think if we have these different vectors where we create a series that makes it really engaging for audiences, it may be something that people choose to watch.
Interesting.
By the way, this while narrating this, it just reminded me. Of course, I've encountered a tiger, and you know where? Tiger cubs. I was so focused on jungle, so this was in South Africa in Johannesburg. It was a creche right next to one of the large outside of Kruger, in fact, and over there they were raising rescued animals, and then they would then kind of nourish them back to health, and then transplant them into their appropriate habitats. So I actually played with 2 lion cubs and 2 tiger cubs. And let me tell you this, they were probably 2 months old. And the teeth were like hypodermic needles. They would just go through your jacket, alright, go through your sweater and straight into your flesh. And their paws, and this small critter, okay, 2 months old, but you could just see the paws, huge paws, alright, and they just, there's this motion where the claw, when they retract the claw or they extend it, you just realize you have no chance.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful animal. So I have actually managed, encountered one. It just didn't strike
So
me.
they practically go into their claws now. The
Yeah.
claws are huge.
Yeah, of course. It's small. I still remember, 2 month old.
Yeah.
But what a beautiful animal it is.
Dipankar, so to you the same question in terms of
Right. So I think what Arjun said, talking about tigers and 3 different aspects of it, that's very important. But what is also important is to talk about the ecosystems where tigers thrive. In the recent past, we have seen tigers in very high altitude areas in the Himalayas, within India, in Sikkim, in Uttarakhand. Records from Arunachal Pradesh, which are close to 10,000 feet. Some point of time, people never thought that tigers would go to that level. Recently, there was a tiger which moved from Rajaji all the way to Himachal. It has been photographed and people have videographed using even smartphones and stuff. So tigers are using variety of ecosystems. These ecosystems provide services which are going to millions of people. We need to talk about the tiger and then we need to touch upon the ecosystem services. Tell the story of the ecosystem services. Is that if there are tigers and if a population of tigers are somehow managing the prey population, the herbivore population, what does it mean for the habitat?
Yeah.
What does it mean for plants? Right?
Very true.
So we need to tell this story. We need to demystify science and dejargonize conservation and tell the story. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, would be the first one. The second point, what we need to tell people, whether it's rural viewers or urban viewers, is about the people who are close to conservation, who are actually on the ground doing conservation, supporting conservation. So first the forest guards and the daily wage laborers. I can narrate this particular incident. Pilivit had just been notified as a tiger reserve. It was a reserve forest, and a few years back, middle of summer, we were with the field director of the tiger reserve, and we were returning from a meeting to stay in a rest house, forest rest house. And then we were driving slowly on the jungle track, and something was moving ahead of us. No light, but we could see there was something moving. So we somehow dimmed the light, and the field director was on the walkie-talkie asking the rangers, "Who's there? Who's there? What's going on?" We could see that it was not an animal; it was something. And by the time we went close, it was a cycle, a person, bare-bodied, armed with a torchlight, no stick, nothing, just
Pedaling along.
and then cycling to some. And he stopped, and he could not recognize the field director. He recognized the forest guard,
Yeah.
and turned out to be a daily wage laborer. And he asked him, "What did you do?" He said, "I have to reach certain point at midnight, so that the person who has kind of guarded that chowki, there are temporary watch posts from 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, can go to sleep, and then he will come back to his base in the morning, where he can catch a quick nap in the morning and then go." This was the dedication. Nobody was monitoring him, and that was the dedication. These are the people, and these are the stories that we need to tell people. Sundarbans. We work together, and thanks for your tremendous support for our conservation work in Sundarbans.
Our pleasure.
We spoke to a lady who lost her husband a couple of years back in Sundarbans. This is a slightly dated story. 5-6 years back, we went to this village, and she was raising a young kid who was like a tiger. I said, "You were raising a cub." And I asked her, I said, what happened? And he was a honey collector, and she was also there on the boat. And when he was coming out, a tiger pounced on him and dragged him back. So finally they could rescue him, but he passed away before he was taken to a hospital. So I asked her, I said, why are you still staying in Sundarbans? In the villages which are in Sundarbans, there's so much of problem, and do you like tigers? You know what she said? She said, I do like tigers. It's a different matter that my husband was killed by a tiger, and it's not that I don't or I never loved my husband, which he was my husband. He was this little boy's father. But the challenge was that probably we didn't do something right, that's why he was picked up. But if there are no tigers, Sundarbans will not remain.
Yeah.
And then if Sundarbans is not there, if this huge mangrove forest is not there, then Calcutta will not be there.
Yeah.
Because that's where, that was the idea of a village lady who perhaps studied up to say 10th standard or so. But this was her emotions attached to, she was sad that she lost her husband, but on the other hand, she also valued Sundarbans. She also valued tigers. So I think these are the stories which are to be told, not by us, but by them, by the people who are actually fighting this battle to help our national animal day in and day out. That's something which has to be told.
Inspiring, Dipankar. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's a very powerful, emotional kind of recounting of that, right? It's in the nature of the animal to hunt. And it's kind of incumbent on us to try and mitigate the instances of a human tiger, what would I say, conflict?
Coexistence.
An encounter, to reduce those encounters, right? And I believe WWF has already done some remarkable work, whether it is fencing, whether it's working with the local communities to create certain protocols of going and collecting hives, where they should do it, where it's safe to go and when it's safe to go based on if you've got tracking on tigers. That's really very impressive work.
So I mean that's good. You brought up that point. What we are doing, and of course with support from Discovery in the Sundarbans, we have tried it and we are working on it in Uttar Pradesh, where conflict was very high and coexistence was on the verge of getting challenged. So we have this model of a village-based or rather villager-based volunteer model. So in Pilivit in the Tarai we call them Bagh Mitra, so tiger friend. In Sundarbans, I think Prakriti Bandhu, so nature friend is the model, who are trained about do's and don'ts, and then they become the eyes and ears, but they also become the spokesperson for conservation. Because not always a WWF person or a forest department person would be going to a tea shop or the roadside dhaba and talk to people there and talk about conservation. But these are the people who can talk about conservation, who can, if they get news about a tiger in the neighborhood, they can inform the forest department. They can also tell the panchayat, tell the villagers what is to be done and what is not to be done. Is that not to start pelting stones at where the tiger is hiding. So that is really working, and they really strengthen the work on ground. So I think if this model can be replicated in different areas, it's known as different, in different areas it's known differently. But this is something I think which will work well, and this is completely voluntary. So that people who like conservation, people who like to contribute to the society, they come forward.
Oh, it's inevitable, right? You have to have capacity building measures because you cannot have a few NGOs or institutions to do it. And if it comes from within the community, it's more legitimate, it's embraced more, it is trusted more, they see the value of it more. So, absolutely.
Indeed.
Thank you, very inspiring. So, in the ambit of our partnership and beyond it, Arjun, these stories are inspiring, and there are a billion of these, right? 25 years in this space, and there's much more. do you see a sort of partnership with organizations such as ours and similar, and yourselves creating content using stories such as these? Do you see sort of knowledge and a lot of narratives coming out from people in the field, which could then translate into some fantastic, storytelling?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, what's the saying? I think reality is more fascinating than fiction, right? Or a version of that.
Yeah.
So that's precisely where we want to derive our inspiration from. From your 25 years of being there in the field, you would have had such encounters with people, like the lady whose husband was snatched by a tiger, but she's still emotionally recounting, that episode, and still values the existence of the tiger in a neighborhood. And there's so many others, right? The wealth of this, these stories are what need to be collected, collated, create some kind of a narrative around them, and then build on top of that with footage that is primary footage that's actually shot. There would be interviews with different people across the spectrum of their involvement with tigers, or they could just be normal common folk who are living in the vicinity and the presence of tigers, and their lives have been impacted. And then we thread all of this together into something that is, again, educational and interesting, right? So it is great. It makes for compelling, a compelling outcome or a compelling documentary, and we will be more than willing to continue to do this. We already do this. So this has been going on for some time. I narrated 2 instances on Project Big Cat, on Tiger Guards of Ghana, and then multiple others over the years that we've done. And we don't intend to stop, because these encounters and stories need to be retold. And to be retold with new technology. So they'll, drone camera traps, drone footage. You layer on much more, a little bit more animation and a little bit of recreation of what could have happened, and simulation, and then there's just so much more that keeps coming out. So we don't intend to stop. We want to keep partnering with WWF and others.
Fantastic. That's highly reassuring, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of.
Oh, me too. Absolutely.
This new space. So thank you so much, Arjun. Thank you for coming to our office. Thank you for speaking with us. And Dipankar, as always, pleasure, and many more stories. And I hope we can engage again and listen to a lot more coming from you. Thank you again, Arjun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching, and stay tuned. We'll have many more conversations around conservation at WWF India's podcast series. Thank you.